A 14-year-old reported she'd been sexually assaulted by a teacher on the campus of the city's premier performing arts school a decade ago. That teacher remained in the classroom until last year. To discuss how that happened, we're joined by Megan Malakote, education reporter for Jacksonville Today. Good morning, Megan.
Good morning, Ann.
So, Megan, this subject of your most recent reporting is Corey Thayer. As of last year, he was the chair of the Cinematic Arts Department at Douglas Anderson, and you've reported on him previously.
That's right. He's one of the 6 teachers that have been removed so far in the weeks and months, now a year and a half, following Jeffrey Clayton's arrest in 2023.
He was the chair of the music department
He
there?
right.
Or the
Clayton was. Clayton was.
vocal department, yeah.
Right.
So he's now in prison.
He's serving a 10-year prison sentence that started in June, I believe. And so following that arrest, the district received lots of like a flood of emails and other complaints about other teachers at DA. And Thayer was the subject of one of them. I believe he was the 4th teacher removed in that list of 6 so far.
And so his removal followed the arrest of Jeffrey Clayton, and it happened towards the end of the 2023 school year. Is that right?
Yes, it was in April of 2023 where he was removed for some allegations that includes the story that we're talking about today, but also other allegations. In fact, the investigation after he was removed from records, seemed to focus more on some of the other allegations, but there are emails from district administrators that pretty clearly state that it was this case that prompted the actual removal from the classroom.
And so we'll talk about the timeline of the investigation and what happened there. But tell us, first of all, what is the nature of these allegations that were made against him and when were they made?
So the allegations say there's a student who was 14 at the time. It was actually in 2023 when she finally told her parents the full extent of what had happened. She had kind of led up to it slowly without fully telling. But anyway, the allegations are that he forced her to have sex with him on campus during school hours at DA over the course of. I don't know exactly how long the time was, but it was multiple times that this happened, multiple different ways, and things that. So she initially, after a year and a half or so, told her parents that he'd been touching her inappropriately and communicating with her inappropriately through text message and some other like app type of methods of communication that were popular at the time. And so at that point in 2015, the mother reported to JSO what everything that her daughter had said. But of course, as it turned out, he was actually doing things that were much worse than the initial set of allegations.
And so JSO investigated and then did what?
JSO did a what feels like a rather brief investigation. It's the entire police report is 3 pages, and the narrative of their investigation is, I don't know, 3 or 4 sentences. And they basically decided that the Duval Schools Police Department needed to handle the investigation because it's, of course, the school system has its own police department. So they decided that the schools needed to handle its own investigation. And that was the report that was actually quite difficult to get. Um, but we finally got it, and it shows that they investigated, the Duval Schools investigator, in 2015. They went and they talked to, I think it was 3 other people that were thought to have possibly been additional victims. And the investigator, who was a man, just pulled them out of the class and talked to them and said, "Hey, I've got these reason to believe that you might have been inappropriately touched by a teacher here. Did anything happen to you?" And so these 14, 15-year-old girls, I don't know exactly how old they were, but they were high school students, said, "No, nothing happened to us." And then uh, they talked to the principal, Jackie Cornelius at the time. They talked to other district administrators, and it's kind of a few different people. And then we're like, "Oh, well, the students said nothing happened," and then they closed the investigation. Um, Now, the detail of why they closed the investigation is interesting because the report says that the original victim's father asked for the investigation to be closed. That he said, you have to close the investigation. And so they did. And the narrative in the police report says that they closed it at the father's request.
Hmm.
Now, a couple things to remember is that the father was not one of the original complainants. It was the mother. And also now, looking back, the family disputes that the father ever requested that the investigation be closed. Mm.
And it's worth noting, I mean, the fact that the school has its own police force has been at issue in some other areas. I mean, there was a grand jury report that was scathing, um, suggesting that the police chief at the time should have been indicted on felonies for basically hiding and failing to report crimes that occurred in schools.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, all that aside, this report existed, and you have been trying to get this report for some time?
That's right. So I started here at Jax today 6 or 8 months ago, and so at the time he was, Thayer was one of the people on the list of teachers that had been removed already, and so just as a regular public records request, I just requested the records for him as well as all the others. And his record that came just kind of stopped in 2021 or 2022. It was like it didn't continue to the present day, and um, so I put another request in and a couple other requests to get the full set of information about his employee record and then also his disciplinary actions.
And not to interrupt you, but I mean, did the school district provide a reason as to why their original request didn't fulfill like the entirety of his employment time?
No,
Okay.
but the full record came back actually right before Thanksgiving. So when I was finally able to read through it, it was much more extensive, and it included the full investigation that had been completed in 2023. Now, I know that I'm being confusing with the timeline, and it is a confusing timeline. Um, but
But basically, after the school district police closed this investigation back in, say, 2015, it was reignited after
after Clayton, that's
after
right.
these series of allegations came
That's
forward.
right. So they closed it in 2015, saying that the father had asked for it to be closed, and then nothing happened for a long time. I mean, the victim eventually turned 18 years old and went to look into it herself, and why did nothing happen to my case? And that was at some point in that interim, and she also had a hard time getting the police report, and I don't know exactly what she received, but I don't think she received the full report. She says she received like one page of the initial JSO report.
So this student in the summer of 2023, after the school year ended, gave a sworn statement that was provided to the school district about these assaults.
Yes, and that's what's in the 2023 portion of the investigation. And that's where I'm getting a lot of this information from. Like, and so she went and after um, the Clayton arrest, and they moved him out of the classroom. We talked about it briefly already, but if you can follow along, they didn't. It doesn't look like they fully considered her complaints at that point, even though they pulled him from the classroom because of the mother's email to say, "Hey, remember what happened here." They returned him back to the classroom, but then they had to pull him again um, because there were these other allegations out there. And so when the mother and the victim's attorney found out that he'd been returned to the classroom, they said, "Hey, why is he back in the classroom?"
I mean, I think fair to say we're fairly outraged by the fact that they had learned that he was back in the classroom despite all of these allegations.
That's right. That's right.
And just briefly, what was the circumstances of their more recent investigation? They didn't talk to this victim, right? They didn't talk to the victim or the mother about the 2015 complaint. They interviewed some current students.
That's right. So they interviewed current students. The police report says it was at random that they went and pulled. It says 6 students from each of his classes at random, and then interviewed them in a room with an assistant principal who's a man, and just, hey, do you have anything to eh, complain about? Do you have anything to say about how Dr. Thayer has treated you? And they all said no. But it is an interesting circumstance, certainly, though, how they did the interviews.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about a new report by Jacksonville Today education reporter Megan Malakote. It is a deep dive into very serious allegations against a teacher at Douglas Anderson School of the Arts. If you'd like to join our conversation, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. I'm going to take a call now from Shyla Jenkins. Shyla is actually a longtime advocate, former student at Douglas Anderson, and has been very vocal on these issues. Good morning, Shyla. How are you?
Good morning, Ann. How are you? I'm Uh, Definitely interested in Megan's article and thought it was a fantastic kind of overview of what happened in this situation. I know with Thayer, there's a lot of mystery, and I think Megan is trying to kind of bring that to light. Very different than the Clayton, kind of where Clayton was bombastic and people didn't like him, and he was, very gregarious. Thayer was the cool teacher. He was the one who everybody loved and adored. And in doing, this, I was a part of the final kind of pull from the classroom with him because Victim A's mom, I know the attorney, and we were talking. I went to school board and sat down with the school board attorney and said, what's going on? And that's where in Megan's article, it's talking about those randomized students, the 6 girls pulled from a very small arts department within DA. I think the theater department is probably one of the smallest. And the problem here is there's no real format that was followed, right? Victim A and her mom were not contacted. Victim Dean, who was one of the letters I received, who alerted me to Thayer back in May before they even pulled him, neither of those victims were contacted. Instead, they pulled these 6 random girls. And the problem here is, and what we've been faced this whole time is, there is no transparency on how this occurred, or as Megan's talking about the timeline and how it flips back and forth because there wasn't really a clear investigation done. And the problem that, we face now is DA has taken, and the school board has taken great steps in getting DA back on track. The new principal is doing a phenomenal job. We've got a new superintendent. So, I think we're headed in the right direction. But until we start getting transparency around how this happened and was allowed to happen for decades, that's where, people don't understand. This story's not finished. This problem hasn't gone away because it's going to affect every school within DCPS. The brand, which is Douglas Anderson, was protected, not the kids. And the reason being is the kids are replaceable in the minds of the administrator and the top, levels of the district. They're not going to tarnish a school like DA or take a beloved teacher, because that's a direct quote I got sitting in the school board attorney's office from the head of HR at the time, who's now resigned, saying, oh, well, parents love him, teachers, say great things about him. The students would be devastated, but never took full accountability for talking to the people who brought the allegations in the first place. And that's the most frustrating thing about this entire story. And until we can get that transparency and the, district and the administrators to do the right thing, that's where we're really stuck at not having this, understanding of why it was able to happen for so long. I mean, we still don't have the third-party investigation report that was commissioned 2 years ago, and we're still waiting for that. So again, that transparency really lacks.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that, Shiloh, because Megan alluded to the fact that some of her public records requests were either slow or simply weren't produced until she was specifically requesting parts of it. And I know you've done a lot of records requests yourself through this investigation. Have you had similar problems getting the documents either in a timely manner or in a complete fashion?
Yeah, absolutely. That complete fashion is the key, because I've gotten some documents pretty quickly. I wouldn't say they're within a week. Sometimes they've taken months, but then getting the whole document, and they're like, it kind of that comes back to, oh, well, we didn't know you needed this. Well, I asked for the entirety of the file. What was unclear about that? That's a really big frustrating part when you're trying to put together a story, especially a story over decades.
Yeah, thank you, Shyla. Megan, I want to ask about the other records that you reported on in this same story. So, as we said, there's a lot of elements.
There are,
Yeah.
yes.
But one of them is that you dug into not just this report and his alleged conduct. And we should say he's not been charged with anything.
Right,
He has not spoken publicly about this.
right.
And these are allegations. So
Mhm.
we should be abundantly clear about that. But your reporting went beyond what was discovered in 2023 or what was alleged to have happened in 2014 or 2015. You pulled records from his prior assignments. What did that show you?
That's right. Well, I had seen kind of some rumors bubbling up on the internet about him when he was a teacher in Orlando, and so I pulled his employee file and requested any disciplinary records from Orange County schools. And when that came back, I found that he had actually had numerous disciplinary actions taken against him from Orange County Public Schools, that they had several allegations, nothing that would be characterized as quite this serious in his file there, but still he had received a couple of verbal warnings, a letter in his file, and one of them was for allegations of um, inappropriate behavior with students. Others had to do with being kind of an angry and harassing person, yelling and things like that. And but yeah, it was as recently as 6 weeks prior to him leaving Orange County and coming to Duval Schools in 2007.
And so I presume you've asked the school district about when or whether they obtained that information from his prior employment, whether that was considered when he was hired. What have you learned?
I definitely asked them, and as best I can tell, it wasn't considered. Although the district tells me they don't know if it was or not, but I don't see any record of it having been considered. In his file, there's a paper that from Orange County having signed off on a kind of a standard HR looking form saying that yes, he taught at Orange County schools for these dates. But there's nothing to indicate that his discipline record was reviewed, and a Duval County spokesperson told me last week that he doesn't know if they were reviewed or not, or if employee files are considered or were considered at that point. However, now the school district does. There's a statewide database of things like this to try to make it a little bit easier for every district in the state to catch some of these teachers who might be hopping around from district to district.
And is that a publicly available database for parents as well to access?
Um, I don't know, because there is a publicly available database that shows discipline records that have been, like, teachers who have had their license removed or any sort of discipline sanctioned against their license.
Those are searchable only by the teacher's name, right? That's
Right, by the teacher's name. Or the district. You can put in the district and you can see everybody with records in the district. Um, but I don't know if there's a separate, like, internal database of that. I'm not. That's a good question. I'm not sure.
okay. We've got a comment from Jennifer on Facebook. She says, Thayer was one of two teachers in the film department. My kid was a student of his. He was the cool teacher, and my child is still very surprised to hear about the allegations. We also have a call from Mark on the west side. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got to wonder if this is happening at this one school, which has a lot of parental involvement. I mean, there's parents in that school all the time, doing volunteer work and everything. What about all these other high schools? I mean, all these other high schools are blameless. Nothing's going on over there. I find that very difficult to believe.
Thanks, Mark. I mean, I do believe, Megan, I know this predates your tenure here, but the grand jury report that we mentioned just briefly earlier did find a pattern of problems at other schools that were not reported. And I know that there has been, at least on the federal level, at least one lawsuit citing that failure to report as resulting in the rape of a girl on campus because her parents say if they had known the true record of incidents at that school, they never would have sent her there.
Right, right. I have pulled lots and lots of records and have even more requests in trying to get to the bottom of that question, because I think it's an excellent question. But so far, the common thread that seems to be coming back is the cases that happen at DA, and that is certainly not to say there aren't cases everywhere. Duval is a very large school district, so I think it's important to remember that you're just by numbers going to see more of this in Duval than another smaller district. But DA does keep popping up again and again and again through these records requests.
I suppose it merits mentioning the importance of the work that you do at Jacksonville today, being a dedicated education reporter, which is something that really nobody else has in this market at this point, prioritizing that kind of reporting. And also, that you have the time to do these long-term investigations, including extensive public records requests that a lot of other outlets are not doing or really don't have the manpower to do.
Yeah, it's not a quick business at all.
Although we should say there's some great reporting that our friend Ann Maxwell has done over at Channel 4 on this
Yes,
topic.
yes.
Yeah. I want to ask you just about the special kind of relationship that teachers have in performing arts schools, because that seems to be something that is often maybe part of the problem, that there's a different sort of mentoring relationship, that there's sometimes a kind of physical aspect to teaching, whether it's, teaching children how to breathe or teaching them how to hold an instrument or teaching them how to carry themselves in a theater production, that there's a little bit of an intimacy that grows almost naturally between a teacher and a student, and that kind of makes it ripe for exploitation.
I've heard that question lots of times too. Is it an art school thing? That seems to be how people often phrase the question. Is it just an art school thing? And I don't know, because I've looked into other art schools in the state. I've even looked into other art schools in our district here in Duval, and DA has more reports of this type of thing. So I don't. It's a good question, and I certainly think you could make an argument for that. However, I think you also have, for every teacher that pops up as having been reported with inappropriate behavior, you have hopefully dozens and dozens and hundreds more who have done this for decades and have never had an inappropriate conduct allegation against them. So they do manage to, like, teach breathing exercises and so forth without inappropriate touching. Um, but it is a question that people pose quite a bit. Is it an art school thing? So I hope not,
Yeah,
but I don't know.
yeah. Um, just give us a peek ahead. I mean, what are you working on now, that we might be looking for in the months to come? What kinds of things are you hoping to dig a little deeper into?
So I think my next step is that there were records in the documents that I received most recently from the district that indicated that the state had opened an investigation into Thayer's conduct, because he still has an active teaching license. He's not employed by the district any longer. In fact, he resigned in June of this year, um, but he still has an active teaching license. And so I would like to know what happened with that investigation that the state opened. I asked a couple of weeks ago what happened, and they have not responded yet.
And is it your understanding that that investigation is closed?
Well, our news partners at News4Jax reported that over the weekend, but I have not heard that directly from the state. So I would like to know what and why and what the details are surrounding that.
All right. Well, we'll watch for that reporting. Megan Malakode of Jacksonville Today. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Ann.